Howdy, Ryan Spearman here. Today we're going to get into a traditional tune in the tuning of G minor. I learned this a long time ago on the fiddle, and I think I learned it from a tune book, and I'm pretty sure it just had the generic title of Traditional Jewish Tune. I don't know if it is actually a traditional Jewish tune or not. Either way, it's a beautiful melody, and I adapted it to the banjo, and it's a good one to get you kind of off and running in this G minor tuning if it's new to you. So speaking of, let's go ahead and get in tune together. The G minor tuning, not to be confused with G modal tuning. G minor is just like your regular standard open G tuning, except for your B string. You're going to lower that down to a B flat, which is what I have going on here. So get that B string lowered down a half step to a B flat. Everything else stays the same in relation to your standard open G tuning. And you have a nice open G minor chord. Alright, so go ahead and get in tune, and then let's get started with the measure by measure breakdown. Measure number 1 should look and sound like this. I'll do that a little slower for you. Alright, just kind of walking up, doing some knockdown through an arpeggio of the G minor chord. Let's take a look at measure number 2. Here we shift up. You know, we played mostly open strings in the first measure. So I would grab that 5th fret of the first measure. I'd grab that with my index finger. That way I'm in position for the next measure, where we're going to do some knockdown starting on the 8th fret. Takes us into the 3rd measure. A little more going on here, but nothing too crazy. This doing a little bit of a brush here. I've got my first finger on the 1st fret, 1st string, doing a bit of a brush into that first boom note there. That whole measure one more time. And that takes us into the 4th measure. That should look and sound like this. Sounds a little odd out of context here, just isolating that one measure, but when you hear it all together, it'll make more sense. For now, just isolate this measure with me and play. That little phantom stroke in there at the end. Otherwise, it's a boom chicka, and then a double thumb roll, double thumb, double thumb. So if you're unfamiliar with phantom strokes, you want to go back to some previous lessons at playbetterbanjo.com and get caught up, or just kind of use some context clues here and figure out we're basically just missing a string on purpose. That's what I call a phantom stroke. So that takes us to the 2nd line of the tab. Measures number 5 and 6 are repeats of our first 2 measures. exception there at the end of measure 6. You see we're knocking down on that final first string open note as opposed to just playing it as a straight boom note as we did in measure 2. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Play those two measures again, measures 5 and measure 6. Alright, measure number 7 should look and sound like this. Pretty straightforward. We're weaving some melody into that boom chicka, boom chicka, boom chicka. Measure number 8, a lot of open string action here. Alright, that's going to take us to measures number 9 and 10. Measure 9 is just a repeat of that kind of a motif we have occurring here. A little arpeggio on the open G minor. So let's take a look at measure 10. No need to dwell on measure 9. This one's starting at the 8th fret. Again, nothing new there. It's kind of a repeat of measure number 2. So let's take a look at measure 11. This is also a repeat from earlier in the tune. So we won't dwell there, and we'll look at measure number 12, which is essentially a repeat of measure number 4. There's a little variation at the end that makes it really a bit simpler. So here's measure number 12. Let's try that again. So our whole third line of the tab is essentially the same as the first line of the tab, just some very slight variations. Let's go ahead and take a look at the fourth line of the tab where we kind of wrap up this whole musical idea for the first part of the tune anyhow. Here's measure number 13. I'm going to hit that 5th fret on the first string. Pay attention through this whole lesson to the actual fingering choices I'm making here on the left hand. Right now I'm using my pinky, and that's for good reason. I recommend you do the same here. Otherwise, measure 13 is pretty straightforward. Boom, chicka, boom, chicka. Measure 14. I'll do that for you one more time, a little more cleanly. Boom, chicka, boom, chicka. Takes us to measure 15. This is a maneuver you may or may not have seen depending on which ones of my other lessons you've participated in, but it's just a drop thumb roll here. So we're dropping the thumb to the second string, and then we're taking over with the finger on the same second string. That's the first half of the measure. Alright. That's the entire measure. And then we wrap up that first part of the tune with measure 16, just a couple open boom chicka strums. Alright, that takes us into the B part, so let's take a look at the second half of this tune. We'll get started with that first measure of the B part. That's measure 17 in your tab. Here we're doing some straightforward stuff. We're refining our right hand a little bit. We could do more single string strikes. There's measure 17. Just weaving some melody in between some boom chicka motions. Boom chicka, boom chicka. Again, pay attention to my left hand fingering. And notice I'm using my first two fingers there. Go on to measure 18. I'm going to shift up and use my first and third finger. Besides the fingering, not much else to point out there. So let's take a look at measure 19, the next measure. So I'm going to shift position once more. Now I'm grabbing this 8th fret note, which is where we're starting the measure. I'm grabbing that with my second finger, and that's so I can be in one single position for this measure. So again, you're grabbing that 8th fret note with your second finger, and then following through the measure with this particular fingering here. Measure 20, we're just kind of walking down still through this sequence. You see we're still in position here from the previous measure. Then we shift down to catch that 5th fret note. Then we're open. That takes us to the second line of the tab, measure 21 here. Now we're going to repeat measure 21 and 22 are going to be a repeat of our previous lines. The first two measures of our previous line there. Now we go to measure 23. We have a little variation now. Again, though, I'm jumping into the same position that we did on the first line. My second finger grabbing that 8th fret note to start the measure out. Straight knockdown and just playing out of position here. Which takes us to measure 23, where we just have a couple half notes here. I'm just going to hit the 5th fret. And then I like to do a nice open strum there on the first few strings. Now we hit the third line of the tab. That's measures 25 through 28. And here we're just going to repeat the same thing we did in the first line of the tab. So I'll just walk through those 4 measures in a row because we've already covered them individually. Alright, so that's just repeat musical ideas from earlier in the tune. And the same is true for the final line of the tab. It's just a repeat of the final line of the A part of this tune. So again, I'll just go ahead and play these last 4 measures for you all together because there's no new musical ideas that I'm throwing at you here. So now we've done the measure by measure breakdown of this untitled G minor tune. Let's go ahead and I'll play it for you nice and slowly, just the way it's written in the tab.